The silk ripped across Evelyn's shoulder, and the bride stood there holding the torn sleeve. Evelyn calmly folded the fallen fabric as 300 guests looked away. Then Michael noticed the worn brass compass marked HB01 beside her clutch, and froze. Headlights were already sweeping up the gravel drive. Someone was bringing documents, and the bride had no idea what they were about to prove. The silk tore with a sound far louder than it should have been. One sharp rip cut through the music inside Parker Ridge Estate, and 300 conversations seemed to die at once. Lauren Parker stood beneath a chandelier of warm crystal light, one hand still clenched around the sleeve she had just torn from another woman's dress. She was 34, radiant in white, surrounded by imported roses, champagne towers, senators, executives, old Virginia families, and everyone else who had spent the afternoon telling her this was the happiest day of her life. 2 feet in front of her stood Evelyn Carter, 54 years old, black, composed, and suddenly bare at one shoulder where her midnight blue silk dress had been ripped open along the seam. The string quartet faltered. A violinist lowered her bow. Somewhere near the bar, a champagne flute clicked softly against a silver tray. Nobody spoke. Lauren looked down at the strip of blue silk twisted between her fingers. For one brief second, even she seemed surprised by what she had done. Then the surprise disappeared. Her chin lifted. The expression that replaced it was colder. "There," Lauren said. "Maybe now you'll stop pretending you belong here." Evelyn did not answer immediately. She looked at her exposed shoulder, then at the damaged seam hanging loose beneath it. She could feel the cool air against her skin. She could smell gardenias and expensive perfume. Beyond the tall windows, the last Virginia sunlight stretched across rolling lawns and white fencing. Everything about Parker Ridge Estate had been designed to communicate permanence, taste, and control. Yet the room suddenly felt very small. Evelyn bent down. Lauren gave a short laugh, apparently believing the gesture was surrender. It wasn't. A narrow piece of torn silk had fallen onto the polished floor. Evelyn picked it up between 2 fingers, smoothed it once against her palm, and folded it carefully. Once, then again. The movement was so calm that several people nearest them began watching Evelyn instead of Lauren. Evelyn slipped the folded silk into her small clutch. Only then did she raise her eyes. "Are you certain?" she asked quietly. "You want everyone here to remember you doing this?" The question carried farther than a shout. Lauren blinked. Then she laughed. Not because anything was funny. It was the laugh of someone who had spent a lifetime believing consequences were things that happened to other people. "Remember it?" She glanced around the ballroom. "So what?" That was when Evelyn looked around too. 300 guests. A state senator stood near one of the marble columns, his champagne untouched in his hand. 2 corporate executives stared toward the dance floor. A woman wearing a diamond necklace lowered her eyes. A country club president suddenly became fascinated by the stem of his wine glass. Servers stood motionless beside silver trays. Wedding staff hovered near the doors. Everyone had seen. No one stepped forward. That silence hurt Evelyn more than the torn dress, not because it surprised her, because it didn't. She had known rooms like this before. Rooms where people spoke passionately about character until character required something from them. Rooms where dignity was praised in speeches and abandoned in practice. Rooms where silence became a way of choosing a side without having to admit you had chosen one. Evelyn's fingers tightened once around her clutch, then relaxed. Lauren noticed. Her eyes dropped toward it. The clutch itself was simple, dark leather with no obvious designer mark. Near its clasp sat an old brass pin shaped like a compass. Time had softened its edges. The metal had darkened in the tiny grooves around the compass points. Stamped beneath them were 4 characters, HB001. Lauren leaned closer. "What is that?" Evelyn followed her gaze. For the first time since the confrontation began, something changed in her expression. Not fear, something quieter. Memory. Her thumb moved across the worn brass. Lauren smirked. "Don't tell me that's supposed to be jewelry." A few people shifted uncomfortably. Evelyn said nothing. Lauren's smile widened. "You come into my wedding dressed like this, carrying some cheap old pin, acting like everybody here owes you an explanation." Evelyn lifted her eyes again. "No," she said. "I haven't asked anyone here for anything." That answer seemed to irritate Lauren more than anger would have, because Evelyn was not pleading. She wasn't trying to convince anyone that she belonged. She wasn't embarrassed enough, and Lauren wanted embarrassment. She wanted lowered eyes, apologies, retreat. Instead, the woman whose dress she had just torn stood before her with the stillness of someone who knew exactly who she was. Lauren took another step closer. "You've been walking around here all evening like you're somebody." A murmur moved somewhere near the back of the crowd and vanished almost immediately. Evelyn heard it. So did Lauren. Nobody challenged her. Lauren glanced around once more, and the silence seemed to reassure her. This was her wedding, her family's estate, her guests, her rules. At least that was what she believed. Evelyn studied her for a long moment. She had met people like Lauren before too, not precisely like her. No two people were ever exactly alike. But Evelyn recognized the confidence that came from never having to wonder whether a door would open. The certainty that a person's place in a room could be measured by a surname, a dress, an address, or the hand they shook upon entering. Evelyn had spent too many years learning what that certainty cost everyone standing on the other side of it. Lauren's gaze moved again toward the damaged dress. "Honestly," she said, lowering her voice without lowering its cruelty, "silk doesn't make you belong in a room like this." A woman nearby inhaled sharply. Still, nobody intervened. Evelyn felt the words settle somewhere old inside her. For an instant, she saw tired hands. Not her own. Her mother's. Hands swollen after long shifts cleaning downtown offices. Hands that had scrubbed floors beneath desks belonging to people who sometimes walked past without learning Grace Carter's name. Her mother had taught her something Evelyn had carried much longer than the brass compass. Never mistake what someone does to survive for what that person is worth. Evelyn looked back at Lauren. There was pain in her now, but Lauren couldn't recognize it because it did not look like weakness. "Mrs. Parker," Evelyn said. Lauren's mouth tightened. "It's Mrs. Bennett now." Evelyn gave the smallest nod. "Mrs. Bennett, then." The correction somehow made the moment worse. "You've made your point." "My point?" Lauren glanced toward the guests. "My point is that people don't get to walk into places like this and pretend." "Lauren." The voice came from somewhere behind the crowd. Male, urgent. But whoever had spoken was still pushing his way through bodies and evening clothes. Lauren ignored it. Evelyn did not turn. Instead, she opened her clutch just enough to place the folded strip of silk inside. For a second, the worn brass compass pin caught the chandelier light. HB, was 01. An older man standing several yards away frowned when he saw it. His expression changed, as though the symbol had brushed against a distant memory. But before he could place it, someone stepped between them and blocked his view. Lauren never noticed. She was too busy enjoying what she thought was victory. "You should leave," she said. The words fell into another long silence. Evelyn closed her clutch. 300 people waited to see what the black woman in the torn dress would do. Would she cry? Would she shout? Would she threaten Lauren? Would she beg someone in that wealthy room to acknowledge what had just happened? Evelyn did none of those things. She straightened the undamaged side of her dress, raised her chin, and looked across the silent ballroom with an expression that made several guests suddenly uncomfortable for reasons they could not explain. It was not the face of a woman who had been defeated. It was the face of a woman who had just learned something important. About Lauren, about the room, and perhaps about the man whose company expected Monday morning to begin with one of the most important financial agreements in its history. But nobody at Parker Ridge Estate knew that yet. To them, Evelyn Carter was simply a black woman in a torn blue dress who had somehow ended up at a wedding filled with people richer, better connected, and supposedly more important than she was. Lauren looked at the old brass compass one final time and dismissed it with a small shake of her head. Cheap jewelry, an unwanted guest, a woman who did not belong. 3 assumptions, and before the night was over, every one of them would become painfully expensive. But to understand why Evelyn Carter stood so calmly while 300 people looked away, you had to understand where she had been 6 hours earlier, before the champagne, before Parker Ridge, before anyone tore the silk, and before a room full of powerful people discovered that the woman they considered least important had been carrying a piece of their future in her hand all along. 6 hours earlier, rain had left West Baltimore shining beneath a pale Saturday morning sky. City buses sighed at the curb. Tires whispered over wet pavement. Water gathered beneath cracked gutters and reflected the red glow of a corner pharmacy sign. Halfway down a block of narrow brick row houses stood Open Table Community Kitchen, its front windows fogged from the heat inside. Nothing about the place suggested wealth. That was one reason Evelyn Carter loved it. At 54, she had learned that some of the richest rooms she knew contained almost nothing expensive. Open Table had scratched wooden tables, mismatched chairs, old tile floors, and a commercial refrigerator that made an alarming rattle every 20 minutes. But the coffee was hot. People remembered names, and when someone walked through the door hungry, nobody asked what kind of car they drove before offering them a plate. Evelyn stood behind the serving counter wearing jeans, comfortable shoes, and a faded gray apron. Her hair was pulled back. No diamonds, no silk. No indication that 6 hours later, she would be standing beneath chandeliers at one of the most expensive weddings in Loudoun County. "Evelyn," Marcus Hill's voice came from the kitchen. "You got a minute?" Marcus was 50, broad through the shoulders, with reading glasses that were forever sliding down his nose. He had managed Open Table for 11 years and treated every donated can of beans as if someone had entrusted him with gold. Evelyn found him beside the pantry door with 3 invoices spread across a stainless steel counter. "Roof again?" she asked. Marcus gave her a tired look. "Roof again." He pointed upward. As if on cue, a drop of rainwater fell into a plastic bucket near the wall. Plink. Evelyn looked at it. Marcus sighed. "Contractor says we can patch it. Again." "And what do you say?" "I say I'm tired of paying people to postpone the same problem." "Then don't patch it." Marcus laughed softly. "That's easy for you to say." Evelyn picked up the estimate. "No, it's easy for me to read." She studied the figures. Marcus knew better than to interrupt. People often mistook Evelyn's silence for hesitation. Marcus had learned years ago that when she became still, her mind was usually moving faster than everyone else's. "This second bid," she said. "They're charging you twice for disposal." Marcus leaned closer. "They are?" "Page 2 and page 4. He adjusted his glasses. "Well, I'll be." Evelyn handed the papers back. "Call them Monday. Make them explain it." "You ever think about working in accounting?" She smiled. "Once or twice." Marcus laughed, having no idea how close the joke came to something much larger. A city bus groaned outside. The front door opened, bringing in cool air and the smell of wet concrete. Helen Brooks entered slowly. At 68, Helen had volunteered at Open Table longer than Evelyn had. She wore a tan raincoat and carried a pharmacy bag folded tightly beneath one arm. Evelyn knew something was wrong immediately. Helen was usually this first person in the room to say good morning. Today she avoided everyone's eyes. "You all right?" Evelyn asked. "Fine." That answer came too quickly. Evelyn wiped her hands on the apron and walked over. "Helen." The older woman stopped. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she placed the pharmacy bag on a table. They filled one. One what? Prescription. Evelyn's eyes moved to the bag. And the other? Helen gave a small shrug. Can wait. How long? Till next week. Helen, I said I'm fine. There was pride in her voice now. Evelyn recognized that too. She had grown up around people who could survive almost anything except being made to feel like charity. So she did not ask how much money Helen had. She did not ask why she couldn't pay. She picked up her coat from the back of a chair. Come on. Where? Pharmacy. Evelyn, no. I need toothpaste. Helen stared at her. You bought toothpaste yesterday. Then I'm planning ahead. 10 minutes later, the two women stood beneath harsh fluorescent lights at the neighborhood pharmacy while rain ticked softly against the windows. The pharmacist brought out the second prescription. Helen started to protest when Evelyn placed her card on the counter. I'll pay you back. No. I mean it. So do I. Evelyn, you've fed me enough peach cobbler over the years to make this a business transaction. Helen tried not to smile. Failed. That cobbler isn't worth this much. Then you've been underpricing it. The pharmacist looked away politely. Evelyn took the bag and handed it to Helen without ceremony. No lecture, no announcement, no debt. That was how she preferred kindness. Quiet enough to leave the other person's dignity intact. When they returned to Open Table, a delivery truck was backed against the curb. A man sat on the rear step holding his ankle. Samuel Price, 61, delivered produce to the kitchen twice a week. A box had slipped from the lift gate, forcing him to jump awkwardly onto the wet pavement. Marcus was beside him. Don't try to stand yet. I've got another stop. You've got one ankle. Samuel muttered something under his breath. Evelyn crouched beside him. Can you move your toes? Yes. Good. Any dizziness? No. Then we're going to let Marcus call someone to check you before you decide you're 25 again. Samuel looked offended. I never said I was 25. Your ankle did. That got a laugh out of him. Once Samuel was settled safely inside, Evelyn and Marcus carried the remaining food boxes from the truck themselves. By the fourth box, Marcus was breathing harder. You know, he said, normal donors write checks. Sounds boring. Normal donors also don't carry 40 pounds of potatoes in the rain. That's why their backs are better than mine. They set the box on the counter. Marcus noticed Evelyn checking the time. Wedding? She nodded. You're really going? I said I would. Marcus shook his head. I don't understand people who spend more on flowers than this place spends on food in a year. Flowers don't have to pass inspection. Neither do rich people, apparently. Evelyn smiled. Then she reached for her handbag. It was plain dark leather, carefully maintained but old enough that the corners had softened. Attached near the clasp was the small brass compass, HB-Y01. Marcus had seen it before, but that morning the kitchen light caught the engraving. He leaned closer. You've had that thing forever. Evelyn's hand stopped. For a moment, the sounds of Open Table seemed to recede, the refrigerator humming, dishes clinking, rain tapping the glass. Her thumb brushed across the worn compass points. Yes. What does HB stand for? She looked at him. Marcus expected the usual joke. Instead, her face softened. That was there before almost everything else. He waited. Evelyn did not explain, and Marcus knew her well enough not to push. There were parts of Evelyn Carter's life that seemed to exist behind locked doors. He knew she worked in finance. He knew she had done well. He knew she had helped Open Table more times than anyone could count, though she insisted most of those gifts remain anonymous. What Marcus did not know was that the old brass pin in her hand represented the first moment Evelyn had stopped asking powerful people for permission. Nor did he know that 17 years earlier, the initials stamped beneath that compass had appeared on a set of documents that saved a struggling Virginia construction company from collapse. Evelyn slipped the clutch beneath her arm. On the wall beside the kitchen door hung a faded photograph of West Baltimore from decades earlier. She paused before it. For a moment, she could almost see Grace Carter walking those blocks again. Her mother had been 68 when she died, but the Grace Evelyn remembered most clearly was younger, coming home late from cleaning downtown office buildings with swollen fingers and the faint smell of disinfectant clinging to her coat. There had been a year when they lost their rental home. Evelyn had already been an adult, old enough to understand every notice taped to the door and every quiet calculation her mother made at the kitchen table. For several months, everything they owned had fit into borrowed rooms and cardboard boxes. Grace never let hardship make her cruel. That had impressed Evelyn more than any success she encountered later. One night, after a supervisor had spoken to Grace as though she were invisible, Evelyn had asked why she hadn't fought back. Grace had looked at her and said, "Being gentle doesn't mean I don't know what I'm worth." Evelyn had never forgotten it. Now Marcus held the kitchen door open for her. "You look like you're thinking too hard." "Probably. Go enjoy yourself." "I'll try. And don't inspect the wedding caterer's invoices." "No promises," Helen called from across the room. "Evelyn." She turned. Helen raised the pharmacy bag slightly. "Thank you." Evelyn gave her a small nod. Nothing more. Outside, the rain had stopped. A bus pulled away from the curb with a deep mechanical sigh, leaving a ribbon of water trembling in the gutter. Evelyn stood beneath the open table awning for a moment, the old brass compass cool beneath her fingers. In a few hours, someone would look at that pin and see cheap jewelry. Someone would look at Evelyn and see a woman who had wandered into a world above her station. And almost everyone in that room would believe what they saw. They would have no idea that HB01 was not an ornament. It was a beginning. And before the day was over, one man at Parker Ridge Estate would recognize it far too late. By the time Evelyn Carter reached Harbor Bridge Capital, the rain had cleared from Baltimore. Sunlight broke through the clouds over the inner harbor and flashed against office towers, glass railings, and the slow, dark water below. Tour boats moved in the distance. Cars hissed along Pratt Street. From the 32nd floor, the city looked orderly in the way cities often do when viewed from high enough above the noise. Evelyn knew better. Harbor Bridge Capital occupied 3 floors of a modern building near the waterfront, but the offices were quieter than most firms managing that kind of money. No marble statues, no giant photographs of founders shaking hands with governors, no wall of magazine covers. The reception area held a long walnut desk, 2 comfortable chairs, and a framed black and white photograph of Baltimore's harbor from decades earlier. Evelyn preferred it that way. A company did not become trustworthy because the lobby was expensive. It became trustworthy because the people inside understood what they were responsible for. Rachel Morgan was waiting in Evelyn's office with a leather folder open across the conference table. At 47, Rachel had spent most of her career protecting companies from people who treated contracts like suggestions. She had sharp eyes, a precise voice, and the rare ability to sound calm while informing someone that their next decision might cost them everything. She looked up when Evelyn entered. "You're late." "I carried potatoes." Rachel stared at her. "Of course you did." Evelyn set the dark leather clutch on the table. The brass compass pin clicked softly against the wood. Rachel's eyes went to it for half a second. Unlike Marcus, she knew exactly what HB01 meant. "Still taking that with you?" "Yes." "To a wedding?" "Especially to a wedding." Rachel leaned back. "That sounds ominous." "It isn't." "Evelyn, you are attending the wedding of the CEO of a company asking us for $240 million. You deliberately declined a formal introduction. You refused the car service Michael's office offered. You told Daniel not to attend, and now you're carrying the original Harbor Bridge pin like you're walking into a history lesson. Evelyn took off her raincoat. I was invited. That isn't an answer. It is technically an answer. Rachel gave her a look. Evelyn smiled. Then she crossed into the private dressing room beside her office. The midnight blue silk dress was waiting there. It hung from a padded hanger, simple at first glance and almost severe in its restraint. No crystals, no dramatic train, no visible label. The fabric held light instead of throwing it back. Deep blue one moment, nearly black the next. Evelyn touched the sleeve. Her mother would have called it too expensive. Grace Carter had believed any dress costing more than a month's groceries should come with plumbing. The thought made Evelyn smile. She changed slowly. When she returned, Rachel had arranged several documents into two neat stacks. One was labeled Bennett Infrastructure Group. The other was marked Final Credit Committee Materials. Rachel looked up and whistled once. That's unfair. What is? You've spent all morning carrying food boxes, and somehow you look like you own the building. Evelyn fastened the small diamond earrings Grace had left her. I do own part of it. Rachel laughed. There she is. Evelyn sat. The humor left the room almost immediately. Rachel pushed the first folder toward her. Monday morning, 9:30. Final authorization for the expansion facility. Evelyn opened it. $240 million. The number sat there cleanly in black ink. Money always looked deceptively harmless on paper. No sweat, no layoffs, no homes, no subcontractors waiting 30 days for payment. No families wondering whether a project would survive long enough to keep the next paycheck coming. Just digits. Evelyn had spent most of her professional life remembering what digits represented. Michael's team expects execution before noon, Rachel continued. The board approved the revised covenants yesterday. Daniel has signed off on the risk structure. Legal has only 2 open items, both administrative. Evelyn turned a page. And culture? Rachel paused. That isn't in the credit packet. It should be. You know what I mean. So do you. Rachel folded her arms. This was the part people outside Harbor Bridge rarely understood. They thought Evelyn invested in numbers. She didn't. She invested in people who controlled numbers. A weak balance sheet could be repaired. A dishonest culture could poison everything beneath it. Michael Bennett has a strong operating record, Rachel said. 41. Took over after his father stepped back. Revenue grew, safety performance improved, debt stayed manageable. Staff turnover? Moderate. Senior leadership? Stable. Complaints? A few, nothing sustained. Evelyn looked at her. Rachel sighed. Yes. I checked twice. Evelyn lowered her eyes to the document. 17 years earlier, Bennett Infrastructure had looked nothing like the company Michael now ran. Back then, it had been a struggling regional contractor with too much debt, 3 unfinished projects, and a lender preparing to pull its line of credit. Banks had walked away. 2 larger competitors had offered to buy pieces of the company at liquidation prices. Bennett had weeks, not months. Evelyn had been building Harbor Bridge at the time from a cramped office with second-hand furniture and a borrowed conference room. She had reviewed Bennett's books personally. Everyone around her had seen a failing construction company. She had seen something else. Good project managers, strong equipment, a backlog that could still become revenue, and a founder willing to put his own property behind the debt rather than sacrifice employees first. So Evelyn approved $12 million, the first Harbor Bridge rescue facility. It was the transaction that changed both companies. Bennett survived. Harbor Bridge gained credibility, and the brass pin marked HB01 was made afterward, one of the first physical objects bearing the company's compass symbol. Rachel tapped the folder. After that first $12 million, you approved more than $90 million in growth capital over the next decade. I remember. You should. Half the financing committee thought you'd lost your mind. Only half? I'm being polite. Evelyn turned another page. There was a photograph clipped to the historical section. Michael's father stood at a signing table years earlier, smiling beside a younger Evelyn. The image had been reproduced so many times that the contrast had faded. Rachel touched it. This is hanging in Bennett headquarters. So I've heard. And Michael still doesn't know what you look like. Apparently, he doesn't spend much time studying old photographs. Or the initials on his financing documents. Older Harbor Bridge files often carried Evelyn's authorization simply as E. Carter. No biography, no headshot, no public profile. Later, when the company grew, Daniel Reed became the familiar face at conferences and negotiations. Michael had met Daniel many times. He had never met Evelyn. Not once. Why keep it that way? Rachel asked. Evelyn closed the folder. Because people behave differently when they know who controls the money. Rachel nodded slowly. And tonight? Tonight isn't an inspection. No. Michael invited me. I'm going to his wedding. And if you learn something you don't like? Evelyn looked through the glass wall toward Baltimore. Far below, a bus stopped at the curb. People stepped off. Other people climbed aboard. No one in that bus knew that a decision being made 32 floors above them might determine hundreds of jobs in another state. Power was like that more often than anyone admitted. Invisible until it moved. I want to understand the man asking me to finance another decade of his company, Evelyn said. Rachel studied her. You sound like Grace. Evelyn's expression softened. That would have annoyed her. It would have made her proud. For a moment, neither woman spoke. Then Rachel closed the legal folder. One more thing. What? Lauren Parker. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. The bride. I know who she is. I looked. Of course you did. 34. Parker family money, Loudoun County. Charity boards, equestrian circles, private schools. Her mother, Susan Parker, is the kind of person who has never entered a room without expecting someone else to make space. Evelyn reached for her clutch. Rachel, I am simply saying I would prefer not to spend Saturday evening explaining civil liability to people in formal wear. That seems oddly specific. I know my strengths. Evelyn stood. Rachel followed. Before leaving the office, Evelyn picked up the old brass compass pin and ran her thumb across the stamped letters. HB Zor 01. Then she fastened it securely to the clutch. Rachel watched. You know Michael wears the compass too? Evelyn looked over. What? Cufflinks. Daniel mentioned them. His father gave them to him when he became CEO. Same Harbor Bridge compass. Evelyn glanced again at the pin. That surprised her. Does Michael know why? Daniel says he knows they commemorate the first financing. But not who approved it. Rachel shook her head. No. Evelyn slipped the clutch beneath her arm. Then perhaps he'll learn something today. They walked toward the elevator. The doors opened with a soft chime. Before stepping inside, Evelyn looked once more across the harbor. On Monday morning, Bennett Infrastructure expected $240 million. Michael Bennett believed the difficult part was already over. The negotiations, the covenant, the legal review, the board approval. He had no idea that the most important part of the decision had not yet happened. It was waiting for him at his own wedding, wearing midnight blue silk and carrying a worn brass compass he might recognize only after it was too late. The black SUV left Baltimore beneath clearing skies and headed southwest toward Virginia. Rachel sat beside Evelyn in the back seat, reviewing messages on her phone while James Miller drove. At 49, James had the calm habits of a man who believed good security should be almost invisible. He checked mirrors without seeming to check them, kept a comfortable distance from the car ahead, and spoke only when there was something worth saying. As the city gave way to open country, the landscape changed. Brick neighborhoods became wide highways. Highways narrowed between green hills. Stone walls appeared beside the road. White fences crossed enormous fields where horses grazed beneath old trees. The farther they traveled into Loudoun County, the more the land seemed arranged rather than simply occupied. Rachel looked out the window. "There's money," she said. "And then there's enough money to make grass look expensive." Evelyn smiled. "Please don't say that to the bride. I make no promises." By late afternoon, Parker Ridge Estate appeared beyond a pair of wrought iron gates. A long gravel drive curved beneath mature oaks toward a white-columned mansion set above acres of manicured lawn. Black SUVs and polished sedans lined the circular approach. White tents rose beyond the house like sails. Imported roses climbed temporary arches, and string music floated across the property on the warm breeze. James slowed near the valet station. "Want me close?" Evelyn looked toward the estate. "No closer than usual." "I'll stay available." Rachel opened her door. "You say that as though I'm not enough protection." James glanced at her in the mirror. "You're the kind that sends invoices afterward." Rachel smiled. "Exactly." James stepped out and opened Evelyn's door. Her midnight blue silk caught the afternoon light as she emerged. The fabric moved softly around her, elegant without being loud. Her dark clutch rested in one hand, the old HB-001 compass pin near its clasp. No one looking at her would have guessed she had spent that morning in an apron carrying potatoes. That was fine with Evelyn. People should not need her biography to offer basic courtesy. She and Rachel had barely crossed the first stone path when a woman with a headset hurried toward them. Emily Collins was 31, dressed in a fitted black suit and holding a clipboard against her chest. Her professional smile appeared before she reached them. Then her eyes moved over Evelyn, down to the dress, across to Rachel, back to Evelyn. The smile changed. "Good afternoon," Emily said. "Catering check-in is around the east side of the house. If you follow this path and go past the service vans, someone will show you where to put your things." Rachel stopped. Evelyn did too. A violin carried a high note from somewhere beyond the lawn. "I'm sorry?" Rachel said. Emily gestured helpfully toward the side of the estate. "The staff entrance. The main kitchen is already crowded, so they're having the additional service team report through the loading area." Rachel's face became very still. It was an expression Evelyn knew well. Rachel Morgan was about 3 seconds away from turning a wedding greeting into a deposition. Evelyn touched her forearm lightly. Then she opened her clutch. The brass compass flashed briefly in the sun as she removed a cream-colored invitation edged in gold. She handed it to Emily. Emily looked down. Her eyes moved across the card, then moved across it again. The color rose slowly into her face. "Oh." Evelyn waited. Emily swallowed. "Ms. Carter, Ms. Morgan, I apologize. I thought—" "Yes," Rachel said. "We know what you thought." Emily's grip tightened around the clipboard. "I'm very sorry. We have so many vendors arriving and—" Evelyn took back the invitation. "Where should invited guests enter?" Emily pointed toward the front terrace. "Straight through those doors." "Thank you." That was all. No lecture, no demand for a supervisor, no public embarrassment. Evelyn simply walked on. Rachel stayed beside her until they were beyond hearing distance. Then she murmured, 30 seconds. Evelyn glanced at her. "What?" "We didn't make it 30 seconds. Technically, we weren't inside yet. That does not make me feel better." Evelyn slipped the invitation back into her clutch. Behind them, Emily remained where they had left her. She looked embarrassed. Perhaps she was, but Evelyn had lived long enough to know embarrassment and understanding were not the same thing. One passed quickly, the other required work. They entered through tall glass doors into a reception hall washed in golden light. Everything gleamed. Crystal, silver, polished marble. Waiters moved between guests carrying champagne on mirrored trays. A string quartet played near French doors opening toward the gardens. Men in tailored suits stood beneath oil portraits, discussing elections and acquisitions in the same relaxed tone. Women in silk and pearls gathered beneath arrangements of white roses taller than some of the servers carrying them. Evelyn recognized several faces: a senator, a bank chairman, two CEOs whose companies had once asked Harbor Bridge for financing. None recognized her. That was not unusual. Daniel Reed had attended the conferences. Daniel posed for photographs. Daniel appeared on panels. Evelyn preferred rooms before they knew her name. A silver-haired man approached with his wife. His gaze landed first on Rachel. "You must be with Michael's business group." Rachel smiled politely. "We are." He shook Rachel's hand. "Wonderful. And this is?" He looked at Evelyn as if Rachel might introduce an assistant. "Evelyn," she said herself. "Of course." He offered her a quick handshake. "What do you do, Evelyn?" "I work in investments." "Very nice." The words were barely finished before his attention shifted over Evelyn's shoulder. A wealthy donor had just entered. The man's face brightened. "If you'll excuse me." He was gone before Evelyn could answer. Rachel watched him leave. "Should I tell him?" "No. He'd come back. That's why you shouldn't." They continued through the room. Near the staircase, an older guest stepped backward to make room for a passing server. His shoe landed on a slick patch of marble where condensation had fallen from a champagne bucket. His heel slid. The movement happened quickly. Most people nearby recoiled. Evelyn moved toward him. She caught his forearm with both hands before he hit the floor. "Easy." The man steadied himself against the banister. For a second, he looked startled more than frightened. "Good Lord. Don't move yet." Evelyn kept one hand beneath his elbow. "Anything hurt?" "My pride. That usually heals." He laughed. At 72, Arthur Lewis had the formal bearing of someone accustomed to old institutions and older rules. His silver hair was combed neatly back, and a small veteran's pin rested on his lapel. "You've got quick hands," he said. "My mother used to say I had quick opinions, too." "That sounds more dangerous," Evelyn smiled. A server finally hurried over with a towel. Several guests who had watched the entire thing resumed their conversations. Arthur noticed. His eyes followed them, then returned to Evelyn. "Thank you." "You're welcome." "Arthur Lewis." "Evelyn Carter." Something about the name made him pause. "Carter?" "Yes." He seemed to search his memory, then shook his head. "Forgive me. Too many names these days." "No forgiveness necessary." Arthur glanced down. His gaze settled briefly on the brass compass attached to her clutch. He frowned. Before he could ask about it, someone called his name from across the room. Arthur raised one finger. "I owe you a proper thank you." "You don't owe me anything." That answer made him study her for another second. Then he smiled and walked carefully away. But Rachel watched him go. "You cannot help yourself." "With what?" "Taking care of people." Evelyn looked toward the ballroom. "Somebody should." The quartet shifted into another piece. Beyond the windows, sunlight had begun to soften over the Virginia hills. For a few minutes, Evelyn allowed herself to enjoy the music. Then she felt it. Not a sound, a gaze. Across the ballroom stood Lauren Parker, 34, the bride. Her white gown caught every chandelier in the room. Susan Parker stood beside her, elegant and composed in pale silver. Lauren was not smiling now. She was looking directly at Evelyn. Not casually, not curiously. Studying her. Her eyes moved from Evelyn's face to the midnight blue silk dress, then to the clutch in her hand, to the old brass compass. HB or a 1. Lauren leaned toward her mother, and whispered something. Susan followed her gaze. For one long second, mother and daughter simply watched Evelyn from across a room filled with wealth, music, and people who believed they knew exactly who belonged there. Then Susan said something quietly. Lauren's mouth tightened. She handed her champagne glass to a passing server and started walking toward Evelyn. The distance between them was not far, perhaps 30 feet. But Lauren Parker crossed it with the slow confidence of someone who had never learned to question whether a room would make space for her. Conversations softened as she passed. Guests stepped aside without being asked. A server carrying a tray of champagne angled his body out of her path before she reached him. Susan Parker followed several steps behind. At 62, Susan had perfected a different kind of authority than her daughters. Lauren's was visible, sharp, immediate. Susan's was quieter. The kind that came from knowing which board members returned your calls, which county officials remembered your family name, and which problems could disappear if you spoke to the right person before breakfast. Rachel saw them coming first. "Oh," she murmured. Evelyn did not turn. "What?" "Your admirer." Evelyn glanced across the room. Lauren was almost there. Rachel lowered her voice. "Want me to handle this?" "No." "That answer continues to disappoint me." Lauren stopped directly in front of Evelyn. Up close, the bride's smile looked different than it had from across the ballroom. Tighter, more deliberate. "Excuse me." Evelyn met her eyes. "Yes?" Lauren studied her for a moment before speaking, as though waiting for Evelyn to recognize that she was expected to become nervous. Evelyn did not. "I don't believe we've met." "We haven't." Lauren waited again. No explanation came. That seemed to bother her. "I'm Lauren." "I know." Lauren's smile flickered. "Of course you do." Susan arrived beside her daughter. She offered Rachel and Evelyn the polished expression of a hostess inspecting an unexpected stain moments before guests arrived. Lauren folded her hands at her waist. "I've been trying to remember where I saw your name on the guest list." Evelyn said nothing. Lauren tilted her head. "And I can't." Rachel's eyes sharpened. Evelyn kept her voice even. "Your husband invited me." Lauren gave a small laugh. Not loud enough to attract the entire room, only the people closest to them. "My husband?" "Yes." "Michael Bennett?" Evelyn almost smiled. "I assumed you only had one." Rachel looked down quickly, hiding her reaction. Lauren did not. Her face hardened. Susan stepped in before her daughter could answer. "Perhaps there has simply been some confusion." Her tone was smooth, reasonable, almost kind. It was the kind of voice people used when they wanted cruelty to sound administrative. "We have had a number of vendors and outside personnel moving through the estate today." Rachel's jaw tightened. Evelyn reached into her clutch. The old brass compass pin brushed her fingers as she withdrew the cream-colored invitation. She held it out. Lauren took it. Gold lettering caught the chandelier light. Her eyes moved down the page. Michael Bennett's office. Guest, Evelyn Carter. Reception access, Parker Ridge Estate. There was no ambiguity. Lauren read it twice, then a third time. Susan leaned slightly closer. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. A waiter passed behind them with a tray of crystal glasses. The ice inside them clicked softly. Lauren looked up. "Where did you get this?" Rachel exhaled through her nose. Evelyn's expression did not change. "It was delivered to me." "By who?" "Your husband's office." Susan extended her hand. Lauren gave her the invitation. Susan examined the paper, as though a second inspection might cause the ink to confess. "There are invitations that get transferred," Susan said. Rachel stared at her. "Transferred?" "Yes. Wedding invitations." Susan looked at Rachel for the first time as though acknowledging an inconvenience. People bring guests who were not originally listed. Invitations get passed around. This one has Evelyn's name printed on it. I can see that. Then what exactly are we discussing? Lauren answered. Whether it is real. Rachel went still. Evelyn knew that stillness. She had seen it in courtrooms and conference rooms. Rachel was angry now. Not theatrical anger, the useful kind. My name is Rachel Morgan, she said. I'm an attorney, and Miss Carter is my client. You have a printed invitation with her name on it, issued by the groom's office. Unless you have evidence that it is fraudulent, I strongly suggest you stop accusing her of things you cannot support. A nearby couple had stopped pretending not to listen. Another guest turned slightly, champagne glass hovering near his mouth. Lauren noticed. Her embarrassment sharpened into anger. Attorney? Her eyes returned to Evelyn. What exactly do you need an attorney for at a wedding? Evelyn answered before Rachel could. The same reasons anyone might need an attorney. Lauren's lips pressed together. Susan touched her daughter's elbow. A warning, not to stop, to be more careful. Susan gave Evelyn a thin smile. My daughter is simply protective of the event. There are important people here. The sentence hung between them. Rachel looked ready to answer. Evelyn did first. There are people here. Susan blinked. Yes, I've noticed. The silence around them deepened. Lauren's eyes narrowed. She had expected excuses. Instead, she kept finding walls. Not aggressive ones. Something worse. Calm ones. What do you do? Lauren asked. Evelyn looked at her. Excuse me? For work. Rachel turned slightly toward Evelyn. She knew what this was. So did Evelyn. Lauren was no longer verifying an invitation. She was looking for a category. Something that would tell her where to place Evelyn in the invisible hierarchy she had carried into every room of her adult life. What do you do? Lauren repeated. I work. Lauren laughed softly. I gathered that. Evelyn said nothing more. Lauren looked her up and down. Slowly. The midnight blue silk dress, the small diamond earrings, the plain dark clutch, the worn brass compass pin. Nothing obvious enough to satisfy her. No recognizable designer logo. No family name she knew. No title announced loudly enough to force respect. Finance? Lauren asked. Evelyn's gaze sharpened by the smallest degree. Why? I'm asking. I heard you. Then answer. Rachel stepped forward half a pace. Evelyn lifted one hand slightly. Rachel stopped. Evelyn turned back to Lauren. An invitation should not require a resume. The sentence landed quietly. Lauren's face changed. The woman beside the marble column who had been listening looked down at her glass. A man near the floral arrangement shifted his weight. Nobody laughed. Nobody challenged Evelyn either. Lauren glanced around. She had spent most of the afternoon being congratulated. Every room had opened for her. Every conversation had adjusted to her mood. She was the bride. The day had been built around the idea that nothing should inconvenience her. And now a woman she did not recognize was standing in front of her, refusing to perform the one thing Lauren believed she was owed. Deference. Lauren lowered her voice. This is my wedding. Yes. My family's property. Evelyn waited. And you are standing here acting as if none of that means anything. Evelyn looked around the ballroom. At the flowers, the silver, the chandeliers, the staff moving quietly behind wealthy guests, then back at Lauren. It means you're getting married. Rachel's mouth twitched. Lauren stared at Evelyn. Susan's expression hardened. You have a very unusual attitude for a guest, Susan said. Evelyn turned to her. What attitude would you prefer? Susan did not answer immediately. That question had exposed something neither woman wanted spoken aloud. gratitude, smallness, an eagerness to prove she deserved to stay. Lauren took the invitation back from her mother. For one dangerous second, Evelyn thought she might tear it. She did not. Instead, Lauren held it out between two fingers. Michael doesn't know you. You've asked him? I don't need to. Then you don't know that. Lauren's jaw tightened. Michael tells me everything. Rachel glanced toward the far side of the room. Then this should be easy. Lauren followed her eyes. Michael Bennett stood near the ballroom doors, speaking with two older executives. He was too far away to hear them. Lauren looked back. For the first time, something uncertain passed through her expression. Brief, almost invisible. Evelyn saw it. Susan saw it too. Susan moved closer to her daughter. We don't need to bother Michael with this during the reception. Rachel folded her arms. Interesting. Susan ignored her. Lauren pushed the invitation toward Evelyn. Evelyn took it. Their fingers did not touch. That dress, Lauren said. The shift was abrupt. Evelyn glanced down. What about it? Lauren's gaze moved over the silk. That isn't something you buy casually. No. So whose is it? Evelyn looked at her. Mine, Lauren smiled. You expect me to believe that? The couple nearby finally walked away. Not because they had stopped listening, because the conversation had crossed into territory they did not want to admit they had witnessed. The circle around Evelyn and Lauren widened. That was how silence worked in wealthy rooms. People rarely announced that they were choosing not to help. They simply created distance. Lauren noticed the retreat and seemed encouraged by it. Valentino? She asked. Evelyn did not answer. Something custom? Silence, while Lauren gave a brittle laugh. You know, wearing the right fabric doesn't fool people who understand these things. Rachel's voice turned cold. Lauren. It was the first time she had used the bride's name. Lauren looked at her. Be careful. Susan stepped between them slightly. Is that a threat? No, Rachel said. Professional courtesy. Evelyn touched Rachel's arm, a small gesture. Enough. Then she looked at Lauren. You had a question about my invitation. Lauren stared at her. You showed it, and it answered you. No, it didn't. It has my name on it. That doesn't tell me who you are. Evelyn's face softened, not with kindness, with something close to disappointment. That's the part bothering you, isn't it? Lauren's cheeks reddened. You walk into my family's estate. You refuse to explain yourself. You speak to me like what? Lauren stopped. The silence became dangerous. Evelyn held her gaze. Lauren could have ended it there. She had the invitation. She had Rachel's warning. She had every opportunity to step back, apologize, and return to her wedding. Instead, Lauren looked once more at the midnight blue silk, at Evelyn's calm face, at the old brass pin she still thought was worthless, and made a decision. She stepped closer, close enough now that Evelyn could smell the champagne on her breath. You know what I think? Evelyn did not move. I think you've spent your whole life figuring out how to get into rooms where you don't belong. Evelyn felt the words hit somewhere old. Somewhere that remembered Grace Carter coming home late from downtown offices with aching hands. Somewhere that remembered borrowed rooms after losing their rental home. Somewhere that knew exactly how much effort the world could demand from a person before agreeing merely to see them. But Evelyn's voice remained steady. I think you should stop now. Lauren smiled. Or what? Evelyn looked at her for a long moment. Or you'll discover this conversation was the kindest opportunity you were going to get tonight. Lauren's smile vanished, and for the first time since crossing the ballroom, she no longer seemed interested in discovering whether Evelyn belonged there. She wanted Evelyn to admit that Lauren had the power to decide. When Evelyn refused to give her that power, Lauren's eyes dropped slowly toward the sleeve of the midnight blue dress. Then she reached out. At first it looked almost casual. 2 fingers touched the silk near Evelyn's upper arm. Then Lauren's hand closed. Rachel moved instantly. "Don't," Lauren ignored her. Evelyn did not step back. For one suspended second, the ballroom seemed to hold itself still around them. The string quartet continued playing near the French doors, but the music had become distant, almost unreal. Glasses clinked softly. Someone laughed on the far side of the room, unaware that the mood had changed. Lauren tightened her grip. "You really think fabric like this makes you one of us?" Evelyn's eyes went to Lauren's hand, then back to her face. "This is your last chance to let go." Lauren gave a short, breathless laugh. "Or what?" Evelyn's voice stayed calm. "Or you will have to live with whatever comes after." The words should have been enough. The valid invitation should have been enough. Rachel standing beside her should have been enough. The dozen nearby guests watching with growing discomfort should have been enough. But Lauren had stopped trying to prove anything. Now she wanted submission. She pulled. The seam resisted for half a second. Then the silk gave way. Rip. The sound was sharp and clean, louder than the quartet, louder than the conversations, louder than anyone expected. The sleeve tore open from shoulder to upper arm, exposing Evelyn's skin beneath the warm chandelier light. The quartet stopped. A bow hung frozen above a violin string. A server carrying champagne turned so quickly that 2 glasses rattled together. Across the ballroom, 300 heads began to turn. Lauren stood holding a piece of midnight blue silk in her fist. Her expression changed. Not remorse, satisfaction. "There," she said. Her breathing was faster now. "Maybe now it looks more appropriate." No one laughed. That seemed to bother her. So she raised her voice. "Silk doesn't change where someone comes from." The sentence traveled through the room. A senator near the bar lowered his glass. A woman in pearls stared at the floor. Emily Collins, the venue coordinator, stood near the doorway with one hand pressed against her clipboard. Arthur Lewis was 20 feet away. He had stopped mid-conversation. His eyes were fixed on Evelyn. Nobody stepped forward. Evelyn felt the air against her exposed shoulder. For one instant, the humiliation reached her body before her mind could stop it. Heat climbed her neck, her chest tightened. Not because she believed Lauren, because she knew exactly what Lauren was trying to do. She was trying to make Evelyn feel small in public, trying to turn a dress into evidence, trying to tell a room full of powerful people that Evelyn's place depended on what Lauren permitted. Evelyn looked down. A narrow strip of silk had fallen to the marble floor. She bent. Lauren smiled as if Evelyn had finally lowered herself. But Evelyn only picked up the fabric. She smoothed it carefully between her fingers, folded it once, then again. The same way Grace Carter had folded work uniforms at the kitchen table after long cleaning shifts. The memory came without warning. Grace standing beneath a weak ceiling light, hands swollen, uniform washed, pressed, ready for the next morning. Never careless with things simply because other people considered them cheap. Evelyn slipped the folded silk into her clutch beside the worn brass compass pin. HB, Row 1. When she looked up again, her face had changed. The pain was still there, but it had settled into something steadier. Lauren saw it and misunderstood. "You're not going to cry?" Rachel stepped between them. "Enough!" Her voice cracked across the circle like a snapped wire. Susan moved toward her daughter. "Rachel, let's not make this more dramatic than it needs to be." Rachel stared at her. "Your daughter just tore a dress off my client." "It was an accident." Lauren looked at her mother. "No, it wasn't." Susan's face tightened. For the first time, even she seemed to understand that Lauren had gone farther than planned. "Lauren?" What? You've made your point. My point is, she shouldn't be here. Evelyn spoke, quietly. You had the invitation. Lauren turned. You keep saying that as though it matters. It does. Not to me. A ripple moved through the room. Still no one intervened. Evelyn looked past Lauren, at the faces, people she knew by reputation. People who chaired boards, funded museums, gave speeches about leadership and responsibility. Not one came forward. Arthur Lewis took half a step, then stopped. The hesitation on his face looked almost painful. Evelyn saw it. So did Rachel. Then a voice came from the far side of the ballroom. Lauren? Michael Bennett. The groom pushed through the crowd. His tie was slightly loosened from the reception. One cufflink flashed under the chandelier as he moved. A compass, small, silver, the same shape stamped into Evelyn's old brass pin. But neither man nor woman noticed the connection yet. Michael reached them and stopped. His eyes went immediately to Lauren, then to Evelyn. The torn sleeve, the exposed shoulder, the strip of missing fabric, Rachel's expression, the silent guests, his face drained of color. What happened? Lauren answered first. She shouldn't be here. Michael looked confused. What? She came in here with some invitation she shouldn't have. Rachel pulled the cream and gold card from Evelyn's hand and held it out. Your office issued this. Michael took it. His eyes dropped to the name. Evelyn Carter. He read it once, then again. Something flickered in his face. Not recognition. Only the uncomfortable realization that the invitation was real. He looked at Lauren. Where did she get this? Evelyn's gaze hardened. Rachel answered. From your office. Michael looked at her. And you are? Rachel Morgan, attorney for Ms. Carter. That should have changed the tone. It did. But not enough. Michael's eyes shifted around the ballroom. 300 guests. His wedding, his new wife, her mother. People from his board, investors, political figures, the social world Lauren's family had assembled. He saw the problem, but he saw it as a problem to contain, not a wrong to confront. Evelyn watched the calculation happen in real time. Michael lowered his voice. Lauren, did you tear her dress? Lauren folded her arms. She refused to leave. That wasn't my question. She was disrespectful. Lauren, Susan stepped in. Michael, this isn't the time. Your guests are watching. That sentence did more damage than anything else. Your guests are watching. Michael looked around again. He swallowed. Then he turned to Evelyn. I am very sorry. For one brief second, Rachel relaxed. Evelyn did not. She had heard the shape of the sentence, an apology without a decision behind it. Michael continued. This is obviously a misunderstanding. No, Evelyn said. He paused. She looked at the torn seam. It's very clear. Michael's jaw tightened. I didn't mean... I know. He glanced toward Lauren, then toward Susan, then back to Evelyn. The silence pressed against him. He had a choice. That was what Evelyn understood. Not between two women, between comfort and character. Michael took a breath. Perhaps, he said carefully, it would be better if we sorted this out privately outside. Rachel stared at him. Outside? Just until everyone calms down. Evelyn said nothing. Michael rushed to fill the silence. I don't want further disruption during the reception. There it was. Not justice. Not truth. Disruption. Rachel's voice became very quiet. Your wife tears my client's dress, and your solution is to remove my client? Michael winced. I'm trying to de-escalate. No, Evelyn said. Everyone looked at her. She did not raise her voice. You're trying to restore the room. Michael's expression changed. She continued. You don't care what happened, as much as you care that everyone saw it. That isn't fair. Evelyn looked directly at him. Then prove me wrong. Michael opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Lauren crossed her arms with something close to triumph. Susan said nothing. The crowd waited. Evelyn waited too. Michael could have turned to Lauren, could have told her she was wrong, could have asked the guests who saw everything to speak, could have apologized without qualification, could have told Evelyn she was staying. Instead, he looked toward the ballroom doors. That was answer enough. Evelyn nodded once, not in agreement, in understanding. She reached down and adjusted the undamaged side of her dress. Rachel moved beside her. Michael tried again. Miss Carter. Evelyn looked at him. The calm in her face unsettled him more than anger would have. I came here because I wanted to know who you were when there wasn't a conference table between us. Michael frowned. He did not understand. Not yet. Evelyn closed her clutch. The brass compass pin caught the chandelier light. HB001. Michael's gaze passed over it without recognition. A detail from his own company's history. A symbol his father had once considered important enough to preserve. He looked away. Evelyn turned toward the exit. The crowd opened silently before her. Rachel walked at her side. No one stopped them. No one apologized. No one said, "This is wrong." 300 people simply made a path. As Evelyn crossed the ballroom with one shoulder exposed and her torn dress moving softly around her, she felt something colder than humiliation settle inside her. Clarity. Lauren's cruelty had told her something about Lauren. Michael's silence had told her something about Michael, and that mattered far more. Because on Monday morning, Bennett Infrastructure expected Harbor Bridge Capital to trust Michael Bennett with another $240 million. Evelyn had not made a decision yet. But for the first time that day, she knew exactly what question she needed to answer. Not whether Lauren deserved consequences, whether Michael Bennett deserved her trust. Evelyn walked toward the ballroom doors without looking back. Her heels struck the marble in slow, measured beats. Rachel stayed beside her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. Around them, the reception remained unnaturally quiet. The guests moved aside. Not one of them had to be asked. A man holding champagne lowered his eyes as Evelyn passed. A woman near the flowers suddenly became interested in adjusting her bracelet. Someone else raised a phone, hesitated, then lowered it when Evelyn looked in his direction. 300 people had witnessed what happened. Many had looked horrified. None had stepped between Lauren and Evelyn. That distinction mattered. Arthur Lewis stood near the edge of the path the guests had created. The 72-year-old man Evelyn had caught before he fell earlier now looked directly at her. His mouth opened. Ms. Carter, He stopped. Perhaps he wanted to apologize. Perhaps he wanted to explain why he had remained still. Evelyn gave him a small nod and kept walking. There would be time for explanations later. What she needed now was air. Rachel pushed open the glass doors. Evening rushed toward them. The temperature had dropped. Wind moved through the oaks surrounding Parker Ridge Estate, carrying the smell of wet earth and roses from the gardens. Behind them, chandeliers glowed through the tall windows, turning the ballroom into a golden box filled with motionless silhouettes. Evelyn descended the stone steps. The loose sleeve of her dress lifted in the breeze. For an instant, the torn silk fluttered behind her like a broken flag. Rachel saw it. Her anger, barely contained inside, finally escaped. I want the Bennett documents recalled tonight. Evelyn continued toward the gravel drive. Rachel. Not Monday. Not tomorrow morning. Tonight. We'll deal with it. We are dealing with it. Rachel pulled out her phone. I can have legal freeze the closing in 15 minutes. Evelyn stopped. Rachel stopped too. Several yards away, James had already stepped from the black SUV. He had seen the damaged dress. His posture changed immediately, but years of discipline kept him where he was until Evelyn signaled. She did not. Not yet. Rachel looked at her. Tell me not to make the call. Evelyn stared back through the glass doors. Inside, the quartet had started playing again, quietly, as though music could erase what had happened. The sight hurt more than Evelyn expected. People were picking up their conversations. Servers were moving again. Champagne was being poured. A wedding was attempting to continue. Her humiliation had already become something the room wanted to place behind itself. Evelyn touched the torn seam. Not because she tore the dress. Rachel's expression shifted. What? If we freeze the financing, it cannot be because Lauren tore my dress. Evelyn, she assaulted you in front of 300 witnesses. I know. She questioned whether you stole your invitation. I know. And Michael chose to remove you. Evelyn looked at her. That is why. Rachel fell silent. Evelyn's voice remained low. Not because she tore the dress. Because he saw what was happening and chose comfort over what was right. The wind moved through the trees. Rachel slowly lowered her phone. Evelyn looked again toward the ballroom. Lauren isn't asking Harbor Bridge for $240 million. Michael is, and tonight I watched him make a leadership decision under pressure. Rachel understood. This was not revenge. That made it more serious. A lender could not judge a company because its CEO had married someone cruel. But Harbor Bridge could judge a CEO for seeing clear wrongdoing and deciding the victim was the easiest person to sacrifice. Evelyn had spent decades reading balance sheets. Tonight, Michael Bennett had shown her something no audit could reveal. What do you want me to do? Rachel asked. Call Daniel. And say, tell him the closing is under review. No funds move Monday without my authorization. Rachel nodded. She stepped several feet away and began dialing. Evelyn continued toward the SUV. James met her halfway. His eyes went first to the torn shoulder, then to Evelyn's face. Are you hurt? No. Did someone put hands on you? Evelyn hesitated. Yes. James's jaw tightened. Who? James. He understood the warning in her voice. His job was to protect her, not avenge her. He looked toward the estate. Do you want to leave? Yes. He opened the rear door. Evelyn did not get inside. Instead, she stood beside the vehicle, one hand resting on the doorframe. Something had surfaced inside her, an old memory. She could smell floor cleaner. Not roses, not wet grass. Industrial cleaner. She was back in one of the borrowed rooms where she and Grace had stayed after losing their rental home. Evelyn had been an adult then, old enough to understand why their belongings were stacked in boxes against someone else's wall. Grace would come home after cleaning downtown offices, remove her shoes by the door, and soak her swollen hands in warm water. Once Evelyn had asked whether the executives whose offices Grace cleaned ever spoke to her. Grace had smiled. Some do. And the others? They speak around me. That answer had stayed with Evelyn, not because Grace sounded angry, because she hadn't. She had simply described invisibility as if it were another part of the uniform. Now Evelyn looked toward Parker Ridge. 300 people had not spoken around her. They had looked around her. The same wound. Better clothes. More expensive room. Evelyn? Rachel's voice pulled her back. The call is made, Evelyn turned. Daniel? He's reviewing everything. Good. He wants to come here. No. I told him you'd say that. Evelyn almost smiled. Rachel came closer. Then she saw Evelyn's face. The anger left her own. You okay? Evelyn took a breath. My mother used to come home with her hands swollen from cleaning offices. Rachel waited. She would tell me about people who left coffee cups on desks while she was wiping them down. People who discussed million-dollar deals 2 feet away and never asked her name. Rachel said nothing. She taught me not to confuse someone's uniform with their worth. Evelyn looked at the torn silk. I've spent 30 years believing rooms like that one were changing. They are. Are they? Rachel glanced toward the ballroom. Too slowly. Evelyn nodded. That may be worse. A burst of laughter drifted faintly from inside. Someone had made a toast. Evelyn closed her eyes for a second, then opened them. What hurts, she said, isn't that Lauren thought I didn't belong. Rachel waited. It's how safe she felt saying it. Neither woman spoke after that. There was nothing useful to add. James stood beside the SUV, giving them privacy while keeping his attention on the estate. Then movement appeared at the side entrance. Susan Parker. She was coming down the stone steps. 2 members of the estate's private security staff followed several feet behind. Susan no longer wore the expression of a hostess trying to manage an awkward scene. She looked determined. Rachel noticed her. Oh, you've got to be kidding me. Susan crossed the gravel. Miss Carter. Evelyn turned. We're leaving. I'm afraid you're going to need to wait. Rachel stared at her. Excuse me? Susan stopped about 10 feet away. The situation inside hasn't been resolved. It was resolved when your daughter tore my client's dress and your son-in-law asked the wrong person to leave. Susan ignored Rachel. Her eyes stayed on Evelyn. One of our guests has raised a concern. Evelyn's face remained calm. What concern? Susan folded her hands. There are questions about whether anything may have been removed from the reception. For a second, even Rachel seemed unable to process the sentence. Then her expression hardened. Removed. Taken. You reaccusing her of theft now? I said there are questions. From whom? Susan did not answer. Evelyn understood immediately. There might not be a missing object at all. This was not about property. It was about control. Evelyn had refused to leave ashamed. She had walked out with her head up. For Susan Parker, that was unfinished business. Rachel stepped forward. Be extremely careful about what you say next. Susan's gaze never moved from Evelyn. I would simply like to clear things up before you leave the property. You have no authority to detain us. Perhaps not. Susan reached into her evening bag. But the sheriff's department does. She took out her phone. Rachel's voice sharpened. Don't. Susan began dialing. Evelyn watched her. Mrs. Parker. Susan paused. You already know I had a valid invitation. Yes. You know your daughter damaged my clothing. Susan's lips tightened. And you know there is no evidence I've taken anything. Susan said nothing. Evelyn's voice became even quieter. If you make this call, you are not clearing up a misunderstanding. The wind moved through the oak branches above them. You are creating another one. For the first time, Susan hesitated. Rachel saw it. James saw it. Evelyn saw it. Susan could still stop. She could lower the phone. She could let them leave. Instead, she pressed the call button. Then she raised the phone to her ear. Evelyn looked toward the glowing ballroom one last time. Michael Bennett was still inside. He had not followed her. He had not apologized. He had not even come outside to see whether she was all right. And now his new family had decided that tearing her dress was not enough. They were going to call the police. Susan Parker turned slightly away from Evelyn and spoke into the phone with the practiced calm of someone ordering a car. Yes, Parker Ridge Estate in Loudoun County. Rachel closed her eyes for half a second. Susan continued. We have 2 women here who were involved in a disturbance at the reception. One of them may have removed property from inside. Evelyn stood beside the black SUV without moving. James remained near the rear door, his phone already in his hand. Susan glanced at Evelyn as she spoke. Yes, both black. Rachel's head snapped toward her. There it is. Susan ignored her. No, they're still here. Estate security is with me. She ended the call. The silence afterward felt different from the silence inside the ballroom. This one had teeth. Rachel stepped closer. You just made a report with no evidence of a crime. I reported a concern you invented. Susan's expression cooled. You don't know that. Then tell me what's missing. Susan said nothing. Rachel gave a humorless laugh. Exactly. Evelyn looked at Susan. You had another choice. Susan held her gaze. So did you. For what? For how you conducted yourself inside. The words were quiet. That made them worse. Evelyn felt something settle into place. Lauren's cruelty had been emotional. Susan's was procedural. Lauren tore silk. Susan reached for authority. Both believed the same thing, that Evelyn's refusal to shrink was itself a form of wrongdoing. James stepped nearer. Ms. Carter, we can leave. Rachel shook her head. Not now. If we drive off after a theft accusation, they will frame that as flight. James looked at Evelyn. She nodded once. We stay. He moved several yards away and started recording. The tiny red light on his phone became one of the only things in the gravel drive Evelyn trusted completely. 7 minutes later, red and blue light flickered through the trees. 2 sheriff's vehicles turned onto the drive. The quiet estate changed instantly. The light rolled across white fencing, polished cars, flower arrangements, and the stone walls of Parker Ridge. Guests began appearing on the terrace. 1, then 5, then 20. Phones came out. Nobody came down. Deputy Mark Davis stepped from the first cruiser. 46. Tall, broad through the chest, gray beginning at his temples. Deputy Kevin Foster emerged from the second vehicle. 38. Younger, heavier, more cautious in the way he scanned the scene before moving. Davis walked straight towards Susan. Ma'am? Deputy, thank you for coming. Her tone changed immediately. Soft, cooperative, almost relieved. There was a disturbance during the reception. This woman became confrontational, and we have reason to believe she may have taken something. Davis looked at Evelyn. Not at the invitation still visible in her hand. At Evelyn, then at the torn dress, then at Rachel. Which woman? Susan pointed. Her. Evelyn met his eyes. Davis approached. Evening, ma'am. Can I see some identification? Rachel stepped beside Evelyn. My client will identify herself. Before anything else, I want the record clear that there is no reported missing property. Davis looked at her. And you are? Rachel Morgan, attorney for Evelyn Carter. Davis's face tightened slightly. I wasn't asking you. No, but you're getting an answer from me anyway. Evelyn touched Rachel's arm, then removed her driver's license. Davis took it. Evelyn Carter. Yes. What are you doing here tonight? I was invited. By who? Michael Bennett, the groom. Susan spoke from behind him. She caused a scene. Rachel's voice turned cold. Her dress was torn by the bride. Davis looked at Evelyn's shoulder, then back at her face. Do you have the invitation? Evelyn held it out. Davis glanced at it for less than a second, not long enough to read the name. Okay. Rachel stared at him. Okay? We're sorting it out. You didn't read it. I saw it. You saw paper. Foster shifted behind him. His eyes moved toward the invitation. He looked uncertain. Davis handed Evelyn's license back. We've got a complaint about possible theft. What item? Rachel asked. Davis turned towards Susan. Susan hesitated. A personal item. What personal item? We're checking. Rachel almost laughed again. So nothing has been identified as missing. Davis looked irritated now. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to let me do my job. Your job begins with facts. My job begins with a call for service. Evelyn spoke before the exchange could escalate. Deputy Davis, I have shown you identification and an invitation bearing my name. If there is a specific allegation, state it. Davis looked at her. His expression changed at the tone. Not because Evelyn was disrespectful, because she was not frightened enough. What is in the bag? Evelyn looked down at the clutch in her hand. Personal belongings. I'd like to see inside. No. The word was simple. Davis stared at her. Excuse me? You do not have my consent to search my belongings. Rachel stepped forward. There is no probable cause. There isn't even an identified missing object. Susan's voice came from behind them. If she has nothing to hide, why refuse? Evelyn turned her head slightly. Because privacy does not become suspicious simply because you dislike being told no. Several people on the terrace reacted. A murmur. Then silence again. Davis held out his hand. Ma'am, give me the bag. No. Foster spoke for the first time. Mark. Davis glanced back. Foster lowered his voice. Maybe we should establish what we're looking for first. Susan's expression tightened. Davis looked toward the terrace. Too many witnesses now. Too many phones. That should have made him more careful. Instead, it seemed to make him more determined not to appear uncertain. Ma'am, he said to Evelyn, I'm asking one more time. And I'm answering one more time. Evelyn held his gaze. No. Davis reached out. He took the clutch from her hand, so Rachel moved instantly. That is not consent. I heard you. You are conducting an unlawful search, and you are doing it on camera. She pointed toward James. Davis looked. The red light blinked. James did not move. Svess's jaw tightened. Evelyn felt the absence of the clutch in her hand more sharply than she expected. It was small, almost nothing. But inside it was the folded piece of silk. Her mother's old earrings case, her phone, and the compass. HB, Saora 1, the object she had carried from Harbor Bridge's first uncertain days. Davis opened the clasp. From the terrace, another phone rose. Then another. Foster looked uncomfortable. Susan looked satisfied. And from the side entrance came the click of heels on stone. Lauren. She had changed nothing. Same perfect hair. Same reception dress. Same expression of a woman still waiting for the world to confirm she had been right. She carried another glass of champagne. Officers, she called. Thank you so much for coming. Davis looked up. Lauren descended the steps. My mother told you what happened. We're handling it. Lauren stopped a few feet from Evelyn. Her eyes went to the clutch in Davis's hand, then to the torn dress. A smile touched the corner of her mouth. She was hostile inside. Rachel turned. Do not speak to my client. Lauren ignored her. I didn't feel safe. Evelyn looked at her. Lauren had stood close enough to tear clothing from Evelyn's shoulder. Now she was claiming fear. The irony was so complete Evelyn almost felt tired. Davis began removing items from the clutch. Phone. Card holder. Lipstick. A folded handkerchief. Lauren lifted her champagne. To think, she said softly, all of this because you couldn't just leave. Evelyn said nothing. Lauren stepped closer. Rachel moved between them. Back up, Susan snapped. Rachel. Lauren went around her. Then, slowly enough that everyone could understand it was deliberate, she tipped the champagne glass. Golden liquid poured across the front of Evelyn's midnight blue dress. It ran over the torn seam, across the silk, cold against Evelyn's skin. A gasp rose from the terrace. Foster took one step forward. Ma'am. Too late. Davis did nothing. For half a second, something almost like amusement touched his face before he suppressed it. James's camera caught everything. Evelyn looked down at the stain spreading across the dress, then at Lauren. No shouting, no tears, just stillness. The same stillness Lauren had mistaken for weakness inside. "You're making a record of yourself," Evelyn said. Lauren rolled her eyes. "What are you going to do?" Evelyn's expression changed. Not anger, certainty. "You don't know what you've done." Lauren laughed. Then Davis reached deeper into the clutch. His fingers closed around something small and metal. He pulled it out. A worn brass compass, HB 001. He held it between two fingers beneath the flashing lights. Behind him, footsteps sounded across the gravel. Fast. Michael Bennett had finally come outside. He was still 20 feet away when his eyes landed on the object in Davis's hand. He stopped. The color left his face, because engraved on his own cufflinks was the same compass. And for the first time that night, Michael Bennett looked at Evelyn Carter as though he was beginning to understand that everyone around him had made a terrible mistake. Deputy Davis still held the pin between two fingers. The brass was old enough to look ordinary. That was what made Michael's reaction so striking. He did not rush forward. He simply stopped on the gravel. One hand dropped instinctively toward his left cuff. The small silver compass there caught the red and blue flashes from the cruisers. Same 4 points. Same narrow ring. Same design. Different metal. Different age. But unmistakably the same symbol. Lauren noticed him staring. "What?" Michael did not answer. His eyes stayed fixed on the brass pin. Davis turned it slightly. "Mean something to you?" Michael stepped closer. His face had gone pale. "Where did you get that?" The question was directed at Evelyn. She looked at him. Not at Lauren, not at Susan, at Michael. "I had the first one made." The words landed quietly. Michael frowned. For 1 second, confusion fought with memory. Then something shifted. A conference room, an old photograph, his father's office, a framed image hanging near the boardroom doors at Bennett Infrastructure headquarters. He had passed it hundreds of times. His father stood at a table, younger by nearly 2 decades, signing documents beside a black woman with close-cropped hair and a steady expression. Michael remembered the caption beneath it. Harbor Bridge Capital, Original Rescue Facility. He remembered asking about it once as a young executive. His father had tapped the glass and said, "Without that financing, there wouldn't have been a company left for you to inherit." Michael had remembered the money. He had remembered Harbor Bridge. He had remembered the compass. He had not remembered the woman. His eyes returned to Evelyn. The same eyes, older now, the same stillness, the same face he had never bothered to really study. "No," he said softly. Lauren looked between them. "What are you talking about?" Michael ignored her. He stepped another pace toward Evelyn. "The first financing." Evelyn said nothing. His gaze dropped to the pin again. "HB. Harbor Bridge." The answer came from Rachel. Michael's head turned. Rachel's expression was cold. "HB 01. Michael looked back at Evelyn. "The original rescue facility." "Yes." His voice became smaller. "You approved it?" Evelyn held his gaze. "I did." The gravel seemed to disappear beneath Michael's feet. For 17 years, Bennett Infrastructure had told the story of survival as if it were company mythology. A difficult year, a bold lender, a second chance. The story was in anniversary presentations and leadership retreats. Michael had repeated pieces of it himself. He had spoken about resilience. He had praised his father's determination. He had called Harbor Bridge a visionary partner. And now the woman standing in front of him in a torn, champagne-stained dress was telling him she had been the one who said yes when every bank had said no. Michael looked at Deputy Davis. "Give her that." Davis frowned. What? The pin. Davis's expression hardened slightly. We're still in the middle of... Give it back, Rachel stepped in. You should also return the clutch. Foster looked at Davis. Mark. Davis hesitated. Too many cameras. Too many witnesses. He placed the pin back into Evelyn's open palm. She closed her fingers around it. For a second, her thumb traced the worn edge. Michael watched. Lauren did not understand yet. That uncertainty was beginning to frighten her. Michael, what is this? He turned toward her. His eyes were different now. Not angry. Not yet. Shocked. Do you remember the story I told you about my father's company? Lauren blinked. What story? The Harbor Bridge financing. I don't know. The money that saved Bennett. Lauren gave a nervous laugh. Okay. Michael looked toward Evelyn. She approved it. Lauren's smile faded. Susan's face changed too. She understood faster than her daughter. Not everything, but enough. Rachel moved beside Evelyn and took the clutch from Davis. She checked the contents one by one. Phone, cards, lipstick, folded silk, then the brass pin. Nothing missing, nothing stolen. The absurdity of the accusation now hung in the air where everyone could see it. Davis cleared his throat. We were responding to a complaint. Rachel looked at him. You were given an invitation, identification, no missing property, and a lawyer telling you there was no basis for the search. Davis looked away. Foster did not. He seemed ashamed. Michael barely heard them. He was still staring at Evelyn. The memory was widening, not just the photograph. The files. E. Carter. Approval initials on old documents. A signature block he had seen in scanned archives. He had assumed E. Carter was some retired partner, some lawyer, some committee officer who no longer mattered. Now he understood. He had spent years benefiting from decisions made by a woman whose face he had never learned. And tonight, when she stood in front of him with proof that she was his invited guest, he had asked her to leave. Not Lauren. Her, the easiest person to remove. The realization struck harder than the financial fear that came after it. Michael's voice was barely audible. You're Evelyn Carter. Evelyn looked at him. Yes. The founder? Yes. Lauren inhaled. Susan's shoulders stiffened. Deputy Foster looked from Evelyn to Michael. Davis stopped trying to look authoritative. Several guests on the terrace began whispering. The name was spreading. Harbor Bridge. Evelyn Carter. Founder. Michael looked toward the house, then back at Evelyn. The Monday closing, Rachel answered. Under review. Michael's eyes widened. Lauren stepped forward. What does that mean? No one answered her immediately. She looked at Michael. Michael. He finally turned. It means the company is expecting $240 million from Harbor Bridge on Monday. Lauren stared at him. And? Michael swallowed. And she's Harbor Bridge. The sentence changed everything. The same guests who had looked away from Evelyn inside were now leaning forward. The same estate security staff who had followed Susan outside were standing more carefully. The same deputies who had treated Susan's words as credible now seemed suddenly interested in every camera pointed toward them. Evelyn noticed all of it. That was the bitter part. Nothing about her humanity had changed. Only the information surrounding it. Lauren looked at Evelyn's dress, at the champagne stain, at the torn sleeve, then at the brass pin. For the first time, the old object no longer looked cheap to her. It looked dangerous. Why didn't you say who you were? Evelyn's face did not change. Why should I have needed to? Lauren's mouth opened, closed. Susan stepped closer to her daughter. Michael looked toward the road. A distant pair of headlights had appeared between the oak trees. Slow, steady, coming up the long gravel drive. Rachel checked her phone. Her expression sharpened. Evelyn followed her gaze. Michael did too. What is that? Rachel slipped the phone back into her bag. Daniel. Michael's face changed again. Daniel Reed, senior partner at Harbor Bridge, a man Michael did know, a man whose calls he always returned. The headlights grew brighter. Lauren looked at Michael. Daniel who? Michael did not answer. He could not, because the car was already close enough now for him to see the shape of the sedan. And if Daniel Reed had come to Parker Ridge in person on a Saturday night, then this was no longer a misunderstanding. It was a decision. The sedan rolled to a stop on the gravel. Its headlights washed over the torn silk, the sheriff's cruisers, the silent guests on the terrace, and Michael Bennett's face. The rear door opened, and the man stepping out carried a slim legal portfolio in one hand. Daniel Reed closed the car door behind him and looked across the gravel. At 59, he had spent enough years in finance to recognize a crisis before anyone explained it. He saw the sheriff's cruisers, the crowd gathered on the terrace, Rachel standing rigid beside Evelyn, James still recording from several yards away. Then he saw the dress, the torn shoulder, the champagne stain darkening the midnight blue silk. Daniel stopped. For 1 second, anger crossed his face. Then it disappeared behind the calm expression that had made bankers nervous for years. He walked straight toward Evelyn, not toward Michael, not toward the deputies, not toward Susan or Lauren. Evelyn. Ms. Carter. His voice was low and immediate, respectful without performance. I came as soon as Rachel called. Evelyn gave a small nod. Thank you, Daniel. His eyes moved once over the torn fabric. Are you hurt? No. Are you certain? Yes. Daniel looked at Rachel. She answered the question he had not asked. Everything is recorded. James raised his phone slightly. Daniel nodded. Then he lifted the portfolio. The Bennett closing has been frozen. The notice is ready whenever you authorize it. Michael flinched. It was almost invisible, but Evelyn saw it. So did Daniel. Lauren looked between. What notice? Nobody answered her. Michael stepped forward. Daniel. Daniel turned. Michael. They had known each other for years, not socially, professionally. Annual meetings, financing calls, project reviews, board dinners. Daniel had been the Harbor Bridge face Michael associated with negotiations, signatures, and money. Michael looked almost relieved to see someone familiar. Can we talk? Daniel's expression did not change. We are talking. Privately. No. Michael glanced toward the terrace. More guests had gathered there now, phones raised, faces pale beneath the warm light spilling from the estate. This isn't the place. Daniel looked around. According to what Rachel told me, this became the place some time ago. Michael lowered his voice. I didn't know who she was. Evelyn watched him carefully. There it was again. The same instinct. Explanation before responsibility. Daniel's gaze sharpened. You knew she had an invitation. Michael said nothing. You knew Lauren tore her dress. Silence. You knew Rachel identified herself as Ms. Carter's attorney. Michael's jaw tightened. Daniel continued. And you still asked Ms. Carter to leave. Michael looked at Evelyn. I was trying to prevent the whole reception from turning into chaos. Evelyn spoke. It already had. Michael stopped. Lauren stepped forward. Can someone please explain what is happening? Michael turned on her. You want an explanation? His voice cracked for the first time all night. The woman whose dress you tore is Evelyn Carter. Lauren frowned. Michael pointed toward Daniel. She founded Harbor Bridge Capital. Lauren's expression remained blank for half a second. Then recognition arrived. Not of Evelyn, of the name, Harbor Bridge. She had heard it before, at dinners, in calls Michael took late at night, in conversations about the expansion plan. She looked at Evelyn. No. Michael laughed once. There was no humor in it. Yes. Daniel opened the portfolio. Inside were several documents clipped neatly together. He removed one. Bennett Infrastructure's proposed $240 million expansion facility. Final closing scheduled Monday morning. Lauren stared. Daniel continued. Suspended, pending Evelyn Carter's authorization. Lauren's face changed. The arrogance did not disappear all at once. It cracked. Susan took a half-step backward. Deputy Foster looked toward Davis. Davis looked down. Michael's eyes never left Evelyn. You approved the first financing. It was not a question anymore. Yes, Evelyn said. The $12 million. Yes. And the growth capital after that. More than $90 million over the following decade. Michael's face tightened. He knew those numbers. His father had taught them to him, like family history. $12 million when no one else would lend. More than $90 million as Bennett expanded. New equipment, new regions, new contracts, new headquarters. The company Michael now introduced as an empire had not been built by one family alone. Some of its foundations had come from decisions made by the woman standing in front of him. Lauren's breathing became shallow. I didn't know. Evelyn looked at her. Lauren's eyes glistened now, not with remorse, fear. I didn't know who you were. Evelyn held her gaze. You shouldn't have needed to know. The gravel drive went silent. Even the guests on the terrace stopped whispering. The sentence was not loud. It did not need to be. Lauren opened her mouth. No words came. Evelyn continued. If I had been a server, the dress would still have been mine. Lauren stared at her. If I had been a teacher, a nurse, an office cleaner, or a woman who saved for 6 months to buy it, you still would have had no right to tear it. Susan looked away. If I had no money at all, Deputy Davis still would have needed a lawful reason to search my belongings. Davis shifted. And Michael still would have known what happened inside was wrong. Michael's eyes closed briefly. That was the part that landed deepest. Because Evelyn was right. The hidden power did not change the moral facts. It only changed what everyone feared losing. Michael took a step toward her. Evelyn, I failed you. Rachel watched him closely. Lauren looked stunned that he had said it. Michael swallowed. When I came into that ballroom, I knew something was wrong. Evelyn said nothing. I saw the invitation. I saw your dress. I knew Lauren had crossed a line. He looked toward the estate. And I thought about the guests. The admission cost him something. It showed. I thought about the board members inside, the clients, the Parker family. I thought about my wedding becoming a scandal. He looked back at Evelyn, and I chose the easiest person to remove. Evelyn's expression softened by almost nothing. That is exactly what you did. Michael nodded. So let me fix it. Lauren turned sharply. Michael, he ignored her. Please, give me until Monday. Evelyn looked at Daniel's portfolio, then at Michael. This is not about giving you time to repair a public relations problem. It isn't. It cannot be about your marriage either. Michael winced. Evelyn stepped closer. Harbor Bridge is being asked to entrust your leadership with another $240 million. Michael stood very still. I needed to know how you behave when circumstances become uncomfortable. Her eyes moved toward the silent terrace. Tonight, I found out. Michael's face fell. Lauren finally understood. This was not a rich woman punishing her. It was an investor evaluating a CEO. And Michael had failed. Evelyn spoke with the same calm she had used inside the ballroom. I am suspending the financing because your leadership judgment is now a material risk. Michael looked as though she had struck him. She had not. She did not need to. You had enough information to do the right thing before you knew my title. You chose not to. Michael's voice was rough. Is the deal dead? Tonight, the closing is frozen. Hope flickered across his face. Evelyn saw it. And I will not authorize it as currently structured. The hope disappeared. Lauren stepped forward. You can't destroy his company because of me. Evelyn turned to her. I am not destroying anything. Her voice was quiet. Your husband's company existed before tonight. Its balance sheet still exists. Its employees still exist. Its projects still exist. She glanced toward Michael. What changed is my willingness to place more capital under his unrestricted judgment. Michael lowered his head. That distinction mattered. It meant Evelyn was not seeking revenge. She was withdrawing trust. Daniel placed the document back into the portfolio. Susan finally spoke. This has gone far enough. Rachel turned toward her. No, it went too far when you invented a theft accusation. Susan's face went white. Rachel pointed toward James. That call is recorded. The search is recorded. Lauren pouring champagne on Evelyn is recorded. The deputy's response is recorded. Foster looked down. Davis's face hardened. Rachel continued. What happens next will not depend on anyone's family name. Lauren stared toward the terrace. The phone suddenly looked different to her. Not guests documenting drama. Evidence leaving the estate. One recording had already been sent. Then another. A guest near the railing lowered his phone and began typing rapidly. Michael saw it too. His shoulders sagged. What now? Evelyn looked at him. Now I go home. She held out her hand. Daniel gave her the portfolio. Evelyn removed the suspension notice, looked at the first page, then signed at the bottom. Daniel took it back. The motion took less than 10 seconds. Years of financing work, months of negotiations, a Monday closing, frozen with one signature. Lauren watched the pen leave the page. For once, she had nothing to say. Evelyn turned toward James. He opened the SUV door. Before stepping inside, Evelyn looked back at the terrace. 300 guests, many of the same people who had lowered their eyes when Lauren tore the dress. Now they were staring directly at Evelyn. Some with shame, some with fear. Some because they finally understood she was powerful. That last part saddened her most. She looked at Michael one final time. Remember this. He met her eyes. Sir, the important thing you learned tonight is not who I am. A pause. It is who you were before you knew. Then Evelyn got into the SUV. Rachel followed. James closed the door. Daniel remained behind long enough to hand Michael a copy of the suspension notice. The black SUV rolled down the gravel drive. Nobody tried to stop it. Behind them, phones were already lighting up across Parker Ridge Estate, because the wedding had been private. But what happened there was no longer going to stay that way. The first video left Parker Ridge Estate before Evelyn's SUV reached the highway. It was 27 seconds long. Lauren's hand closed around the midnight blue sleeve. The silk tore. Evelyn bent to retrieve the fallen fabric while a circle of well-dressed guests watched without moving. The second video was worse. It showed Lauren outside beneath the flashing lights of the sheriff's cruisers, slowly tipping her champagne glass over Evelyn's already damaged dress. The camera caught Deputy Mark Davis standing only a few feet away. It caught Kevin Foster hesitating. It caught Rachel's warning. And it caught the crowd on the terrace doing what the crowd inside had already done. Watching. By midnight, copies were moving from private messages to social media accounts. By Sunday morning, the questions had changed. People were no longer asking what happened at the wedding. They were asking why nobody stopped it. Evelyn woke in Baltimore to rain tapping softly against her windows. The torn dress hung over the back of a chair. She had rinsed nothing, repaired nothing. The champagne stain had dried into the silk. On the kitchen counter beside her espresso sat the HB01 pin. Her phone had accumulated dozens of calls. Reporters, business contacts, people who had been at Parker Ridge. Some offered apologies. Some offered explanations. Some insisted they had been about to intervene. Evelyn answered none of them. Rachel called at 8. "You should see what's happening. I've seen enough. The Bennett board is meeting at 10. That made Evelyn pause. Who called it? Helen Brooks. Evelyn knew the name. 63, board chair, former infrastructure executive. Serious enough that Harbor Bridge's investment team had repeatedly described her as the strongest independent voice inside Bennett. What are they considering? Michael's authority. Evelyn looked toward the gray harbor. Good. Rachel was quiet. You don't sound pleased. This isn't supposed to please me. At 10 that morning, the Bennett Infrastructure Board gathered in an emergency video conference. Michael sat alone in his office. He had not slept. Across his screen were executives who had attended his wedding, directors who had not, outside counsel, and Helen Brooks at the center. Helen did not begin with the financing. She began with the video. We are not here because Evelyn Carter is wealthy. Michael looked down. We are here because our chief executive witnessed an invited guest being publicly mistreated, had evidence that she belonged there, and chose convenience over principle. Nobody interrupted. Helen continued. If Ms. Carter had been a waitress, a teacher, or a woman with $12 in her checking account, would this board care less? Silence. That silence is precisely why we are meeting. Michael closed his eyes. He had heard the same lesson from Evelyn. Now it was following him into his own boardroom. By noon, Bennett Infrastructure announced that Michael's sole authority over major financing decisions had been suspended pending an independent governance review. He remained CEO. But no major capital commitment could proceed under his signature alone. The board retained outside counsel to review executive culture, escalation procedures, vendor treatment, and complaints involving discrimination or retaliation. They refused to blame Lauren and declare the problem solved. Helen made that clear. A company is not judged only by what its leader personally does, she told the directors. It is judged by what he permits when doing the right thing becomes inconvenient. Michael did not argue. For once, he had no defense worth making. The consequences moved outward. The Parker Family Foundation held an emergency meeting Sunday afternoon. Lauren had served on its board for 6 years. By evening, she was removed. The announcement was short. The discussions behind it were not. Several donors had attended the wedding. Some had watched the confrontation. None wanted reporters asking why they had remained silent. Susan Parker discovered that social influence had limits when cameras entered the room. Calls that would once have been returned immediately went unanswered. 2 families canceled upcoming events at Parker Ridge Estate. A longtime corporate sponsor requested a review of its relationship with the Parker Foundation, and the civil notice from Rachel Morgan's office arrived Monday morning. Lauren sat at her mother's dining table when she read it. Her hands shook. This is because she wants to destroy me. Susan said nothing. Lauren looked up. Mom? Susan stared toward the windows. For the first time since the wedding, she seemed smaller. We called the police. Lauren frowned. You called them. Susan looked at her daughter. And you poured champagne on her while they were standing there. Lauren's mouth tightened. You were there. Yes. The word came quietly. Susan looked down. So was everyone else. At the Loudoun County Sheriff's Office, the videos created a different kind of crisis. Deputy Davis was placed on administrative leave while investigators reviewed the search of Evelyn's clutch. Foster was reassigned pending an inquiry into his failure to intervene. The sheriff ordered preservation of dispatch recordings, body camera footage, and incident reports. Then Rachel's office submitted a formal complaint. It included James Miller's recording. That changed the investigation. There was no confusion about Evelyn's refusal. No ambiguity about Rachel identifying herself as counsel. No missing property had been named before the search, and no one could claim Lauren's second humiliation had happened unseen. Davis had been standing there. The review widened. Earlier complaints bearing his name were pulled from storage. Most had never attracted public attention. Now they would. 48 hours after the wedding, Michael stood in the Bennett headquarters hallway staring at the old photograph he had finally remembered. His father sat at a conference table 17 years earlier. Beside him was a younger Evelyn Carter. The original Harbor Bridge agreement lay between them. Near the bottom of the frame sat a small presentation box. Michael knew what had been inside. HB-01. He leaned closer to the photograph. Evelyn was not smiling. She was listening to his father with the same calm attention she had shown Michael before he failed her. Michael read the plaque beneath the frame, Harbor Bridge Capital, First Rescue Facility. He had passed it hundreds of times. He had known the story. He had never learned the person. Helen Brooks approached from behind him. Michael heard her footsteps but did not turn. "How bad?" he asked. "The review?" "Yes." Helen stopped beside him. "Too early to know." "The company?" "Harbor Bridge's freeze hurts, but Bennett is not collapsing tomorrow." Michael nodded. He almost looked relieved. Helen did not let him have that comfort. "That doesn't mean the damage is small." He looked at her. She pointed toward the photograph. "What do you see?" Michael stared at Evelyn's younger face. "The woman who helped save my father's company." Helen shook her head. "That is what you see now." Michael said nothing. "What did you see Saturday night before Daniel Reed arrived?" The question sat between them. Michael remembered Evelyn's torn shoulder, her invitation, Rachel's anger, Lauren demanding she leave, and his own voice asking Evelyn to make the problem easier for everyone else. Finally, he answered, "A stranger I thought I could ask to leave." Helen nodded. "There is your real problem." Michael looked toward her. "We all behaved differently after learning who she was." "Yes. The deputies, Lauren, Susan, the guests. You." Michael lowered his eyes. "Me." Helen's voice softened. "That is what the review has to fix. Otherwise, this becomes nothing more than a story about being careful who you insult because they might be rich." Michael looked again at Evelyn in the photograph. "And that's not the lesson." "No." Helen walked away. Michael remained there. Across the country, people watched the videos for reasons that had nothing to do with finance. Adults told stories about being mistaken for employees at places where they were guests. Workers described executives who never learned their names. People talked about moments when they had watched someone being humiliated and convinced themselves it was safer not to interfere. Arthur Lewis recorded no public statement. Instead, he wrote Evelyn a letter. 3 sentences. "I saw what was happening. You helped me when I was falling. And when you needed someone to stand beside you, I remained still. I am ashamed of that." Evelyn read it twice, then folded it carefully. She did not throw it away. Weeks passed. The noise slowly changed shape. The videos stopped appearing every hour. News vans left Parker Ridge. The wedding flowers died. The champagne stains were cleaned from the gravel. But consequences remained after attention moved elsewhere. Lauren faced the civil claim. Susan's report remained under review. The sheriff's department examined Davis's earlier complaints. Bennett's governance investigation continued. And Harbor Bridge's $240 million remained exactly where Evelyn had left it, uncommitted. 3 months after the wedding, on a cold morning in West Baltimore, Evelyn stood inside Open Table Community Kitchen. The dining room was being renovated. Fresh lumber rested against one wall. New light fixtures waited in cardboard boxes. Marcus Hill was arguing cheerfully with a contractor about where to place additional outlets. Helen Brooks, 68, sat near the window sorting donated coats. Rain streaked the glass. Outside, a city bus groaned to a stop. Evelyn wore an apron over a simple sweater. The torn midnight blue dress was nowhere in sight. Marcus looked toward the front door. His smile disappeared. Evelyn. She followed his gaze. A man stood outside beneath the awning. No driver, no assistants, no legal team, no cameras. Michael Bennett. He carried no contract. Only a plain envelope in one hand. A rainwater darkened the shoulders of his coat. For several seconds he did not come inside. He simply waited, as though he finally understood that entering someone else's space was not a right. It was an invitation. Evelyn watched Michael through the rain-streaked glass. For 3 months, she had seen his name in reports, board minutes, legal correspondence, and news stories. She had not spoken to him once. Now he stood outside Open Table Community Kitchen with rain on his coat and a plain white envelope in his hand. Marcus glanced at her. "Want me to tell him you're busy?" Evelyn considered it. Then she untied her apron. "No." She walked to the door and opened it. Warm air escaped into the cold. Michael did not step forward. "Miss Carter." "Michael, I was hoping I could speak with you." Evelyn looked at the envelope. "If that's a proposal, you can take it back to Baltimore." "It isn't." "A request to reopen the financing?" "No." That answer surprised her. Michael held out the envelope. "It's an apology." Evelyn did not take it immediately. "You could have mailed it." "I could have." "Why didn't you?" Michael looked past her into the kitchen, at scratched tables being refinished, at boxes of donated food, at Helen sorting winter coats beneath warm yellow lights. "Because what I did wasn't distant." He looked at Evelyn again. "So I didn't want the apology to be." She took the envelope. Michael still did not enter. Evelyn noticed. "Come in." Only then did he cross the threshold. Marcus returned to his work without greeting him. Helen looked up, recognized Michael from the news, and quietly resumed folding a brown coat. Nobody treated him as important. Nobody treated him badly either. For perhaps the first time in months, Michael was simply another man standing in a room. Evelyn opened the envelope. The letter was handwritten. No corporate letterhead. No attorney's language. No carefully polished statement about regrettable circumstances. She read silently. Michael did not blame Lauren. He did not blame Susan. He did not blame the pressure of the wedding. He wrote that his failure began the moment he saw an innocent guest being mistreated and calculated what would be easiest instead of what would be right. He admitted something else. The part Evelyn had wanted him to understand. Learning who she was had not made his behavior wrong. It had only made the cost visible to him. Evelyn folded the letter. Michael waited. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said. "Good." He nodded. "And I didn't come to ask Harbor Bridge for another chance." "Why did you come?" Michael looked around the kitchen. "Because I spent most of my career thinking leadership was about making difficult decisions." He paused. "I learned I was only good at difficult decisions when the room agreed with me." Evelyn studied him. There was no satisfaction in seeing him humbled, only a quiet recognition that, perhaps, something had finally reached him. "The board review?" she asked. "Still ongoing." "Helen Brooks doesn't rush." "No. That's one reason I respect her." Michael almost smiled. "So do I now." Evelyn tucked the letter into her apron pocket. "An apology doesn't restore trust." "I know. And it doesn't restore the financing." "I know that too." "Then we're clear." "Yes." Michael looked toward the door. "Thank you for reading it." He started to leave. "Michael." He turned. Evelyn's voice softened. What you do after an apology matters more than how well you write one. He nodded. Then he walked out into the rain. No cameras followed him. That mattered. The $240 million never returned to Bennett Infrastructure. Evelyn had made that decision before Michael came to Open Table. Harbor Bridge spent months evaluating alternatives, and eventually chose a consortium led by Isaiah Booker, a 38-year-old black engineer from West Baltimore. Isaiah had built his company slowly. No inherited estate, no famous surname. His first office had been above a small restaurant near a bus line, where the windows shook whenever delivery trucks passed. His company employed local adults, trained workers moving into skilled trades, renovated affordable housing, and had something Evelyn valued even more than impressive projections: governance that survived scrutiny. When Daniel Reed presented the final recommendation, Evelyn asked the question she now asked before every major investment. What happens when nobody important is watching? Daniel understood. He showed her the employee reports, vendor interviews, complaint procedures, independent oversight. Evelyn approved the investment. Not as charity, as business, good business. Months later, Open Table Community Kitchen reopened its renovated dining room. The old scratched tables had been restored instead of replaced. New lights cast a warm amber glow across the room. The kitchen had modern equipment, wider aisles, and enough storage that Marcus no longer had to stack food boxes in his office. Helen Brooks stood near the coat rack wearing the same delighted expression she usually reserved for a fully stocked pantry. Arthur Lewis came from Virginia. So did several people who had attended the wedding. Some had written Evelyn privately. Others had agreed to participate in public discussions about bystander responsibility and workplace culture. Bennett Infrastructure sent representatives from its board. Michael came alone. He stayed near the back. Rachel arrived last. She stopped when she saw Evelyn. For once, the attorney had no immediate words. Evelyn was wearing midnight blue silk, the dress repaired. The shoulder seam was neat, but visible if you knew where to look. Evelyn had specifically told the tailor not to erase it completely. Beside that faint seam sat the worn brass compass, HB 01. Rachel approached. You kept the mark. Yes, you could have made it invisible. I know. Rachel touched the edge of the repaired sleeve gently. Why didn't you? Evelyn looked around the room, at Marcus laughing near the serving counter, at Helen helping arrange coats, at Isaiah speaking with several neighborhood contractors, at Arthur Lewis, who met Evelyn's eyes this time instead of looking away, at Michael standing quietly near the wall. Because repaired isn't the same as untouched. Rachel nodded. Evelyn looked down at the seam, and there's nothing shameful about that. Marcus tapped a spoon against a glass. The room quieted. He tried to persuade Evelyn to make a speech. She refused, naturally. But Arthur Lewis stood. His hands trembled slightly around his cane. I would like to say something. Evelyn looked at him. Arthur faced the room. At Parker Ridge, this woman helped me when I nearly fell. His voice was steady. Later that evening, when someone tried to strip away her dignity in front of me, I did nothing. Nobody moved. I told myself I was shocked. I told myself it happened too quickly. Arthur swallowed. Those were explanations, not excuses. Several former wedding guests lowered their heads. Arthur did not. I'm sorry, Evelyn. She held his gaze. Thank you, Arthur. That was all. No public humiliation in return. No demand that anyone kneel beneath the weight of their shame. Acknowledgement was enough. The people who had failed could not change that night. They could decide what kind of people they would be the next time. Later, when the room filled with conversation again, Rachel stood beside Evelyn near the serving counter. Her eyes returned to the repaired dress. Evelyn ran 2 fingers along the seam. Grace would have fixed this herself, she said. Your mother? Evelyn nodded. She hated throwing away anything that still had life in it. Rachel smiled. Sounds familiar. Evelyn looked at the silk beneath the warm kitchen lights. Something can be damaged and still keep every bit of its worth. Rachel said nothing. She did not need to. Outside, a city bus sighed at the curb. Helen was preparing to leave. Evelyn immediately crossed the room. Let me help you with that. Helen laughed as Evelyn held her coat. You've got investors in here waiting to talk to you. They can wait. You never change. I hope not. Evelyn helped Helen into the coat and walked her to the door. Cameras waited outside. A few reporters called Evelyn's name. She did not turn toward them. She made sure Helen reached the sidewalk safely, waited until the bus doors opened, and waved as Helen climbed aboard. The bus pulled away through the Baltimore evening. Evelyn stood beneath the kitchen's warm doorway for a moment. The old brass compass rested beside the repaired seam. One marked where Harbor Bridge had begun. The other marked what Evelyn had survived without surrendering herself. Then she turned away from the cameras and walked back into the glowing kitchen. Because the lesson had never been that Lauren should have respected Evelyn because Evelyn controlled millions of dollars. It was that Evelyn deserved dignity before anyone knew her name, before Harbor Bridge, before HB-01, before anyone discovered the power she carried quietly. Human worth had never depended on an invitation, a title, a bank account, or whether powerful people finally decided to look up from their champagne glasses. And perhaps that was the question Parker Ridge left behind. If you had been one of those 300 guests, would you have spoken before you knew who Evelyn was? Evelyn walked back into that glowing community kitchen, wearing the same midnight blue dress, its repaired seam still visible beside HB-01. She didn't erase the scar, because surviving what happened never required pretending it hadn't happened. The hardest test of character often comes when speaking up could make the room uncomfortable and staying silent would be easier. Parker Ridge showed that silence isn't always neutral. Sometimes it gives cruelty the space it needs to continue. So today, if you see someone being singled out or humiliated, try one small thing. Move closer and calmly say, "That's not right." You may never know their story or their status, and Evelyn's story reminds us that you shouldn't need to. If you had been standing in that ballroom before anyone knew who Evelyn was, what would you have said? Tell me in the comments, and stay with me, because the next story begins with another room making a very confident mistake.